Holman HR presents HR Fun and Stuff, infotainment that'll have you laughing, listening, and learning. With no further ado, here's your host, Michael Goldfarb.
Hey, good day everybody. I'm Michael Goldfarb, President of Holman HR. Welcome to another Holman HR webinar. Another outstanding guest made it all the way from Orange County. Tom Willingham, welcome. Tom is part of the Hampton group. We are really pleased to have him. I think you're going to be just as pleased as I am, because we are going to get into some really important information about operations, strategy, execution. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you all want to hear. Tom, tell me a little bit before we just get into the meat of it. So, who you with? How did you get into this line of work?
Sure. My firm's the Hampton Group, Operations and Management Consulting. Started out my career as an industrial engineer, doing a lot of work with lean manufacturing, helping companies to implement processes to improve their organization. How can they drive waste out? And what's real exciting about the area of execution management is so many organizations focus on cost cutting, driving waste out, but they don't have a process to really drive their strategy. And what I found is this execution management process, it addresses one of the great unaddressed issues in business today, and that's how to successfully execute your strategy.
Other than executing your people. So
Great.
Okay, we'll start on a positive note. Great. I like it. I told you guys are going to like this. All right, let's go to the next slide. Welcome back, everybody. Michael Goldfarb, Tom Willingham. We are talking strategy, execution. I have no idea what that is, but I think Tom's going to explain it. So Tom, let's jump right in. We're looking at something called strategic execution is not. I don't know what it is, so
Sure.
Give us a little enlightenment, will you?
Sure. When we talk about strategic execution, unfortunately there's no shared definition like there is with common operational terms such as employee utilization or inventory turns, day sales outstanding. In strategic execution, we found it's easier sometimes to start by defining what it is not.
Okay.
And what it's not is, it's not project management. It's not going out creating a PowerPoint and tracking objectives. It's not an HR system or an HR information system. It's not about...
I can tell you, since most of our people are HR, they're probably happy.
Exactly.
Something new.
Right.
Okay.
It's not just addressing performance management and appraisals. However, it does touch on that area because that is so important. It's also not a fad. It's not something where you just go out and flip a switch and turn it on and say, we're done. Go out to a seminar and implement it the next day. And very importantly, it's not something that the senior executive, specifically the CEO, just hands off or delegates. The CEO, the chief executive of an organization, really needs to be involved in this process.
I like everything you said, but what struck me in particular, and we kind of preach this as we talk to HR people and management in general. What I liked was you mentioned, it's not all about performance and this, but it has traces of these things. So it does incorporate management in HR and the upper level, the C officers. And what I want to ask you is, because we always preach to HR, we got to get away from the old rutted models where all we are is the hatchet people and bean counters or watching the paper. So this sounds like a great jumping off place for people in the whole organization to get involved in some really creative stuff.
Exactly. This is a critical area that touches every aspect of a business. It's something that the leadership team of an organization needs to own. It's that leadership team, and unfortunately many organizations have a executive team that's really not a team. Mm-hmm. It's just a group of individuals that are coming together, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, having a discussion, but they're not an aligned team.
They're not really a team,
and the strategic execution process really helps that team to bond, to get together on the same page, and really move the organization forward.
It's great, and I know we all throw and banner around the term team, but team it's fundamental. People really need, don't they, to really accept that they are part of a team, that there isn't a place for the individual, but there is a greater good here.
Yes, people need to feel that engagement. Human beings are goal-seeking machines, and we want to be part of something. And if we can be part of a team and understand where the organization is going, the results are phenomenal.
Yeah, it sounds like it builds both. You get gratification as an individual, and that obviously contributes to the melding and the strength of the team.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
I hope you guys are your appetite's getting wet here. I'm liking what I'm listening to. We'll talk some more. We'll be right back. Hi everybody. We're back. Tom Willingham, the Hampton Group. We're talking strategy, execution, stuff that makes working enjoyable and challenging from a creative standpoint. Tom, great to have you. We're talking about, on this slide, about the Keene Institute's definition. So tell us a little bit, first of all, what is Keene, your relationship to that, and we'll go from there.
Sure. The Keene Institute is a network of about 50 consultants across the U.S. that over the past decade have worked with about 583 companies and impacted tens of thousands of employees in teaching them this process. Back in 2000-2001, I was COO at a small aerospace component manufacturer here in Southern California. And unfortunately at that company, we had a very dysfunctional management team. It's common in many organizations. And I looked at the outside.
Nobody's dysfunctional.
Exactly.
We're all perfect.
We all know what we're doing. And I reached out to the Keene, folks at Keene Insight to help us get the team on the same page. And we ended up being the third organization to work with this new process that they had developed on strategic execution. And the results that we had were just phenomenal. It really brought the organization together, got everybody on the same page, and just really took the results of the company to the next level.
I mean, it's interesting. I think, we try to bring guests that one of the, I guess, characteristics that we want to instill in our constituents is a sense of professionalism. And I like to think that part of being professional in an organization is understanding we have limitations, and that there are other people, consultants, that if we bring to bear, we really can improve on what is already, in other words, it's our own. And there's no shame in it, right? I mean, there's no shame in having an outsider come in and talk to us a little about that, because how do the management teams that you guys work with, how do they initially react when you come in there? Because I know people are going, oh, come on, man, quit with the multisyllabic words. We've heard it all before.
No, it's unfortunate that you get many small, family-owned, middle-market businesses that have the culture of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
And business is difficult. Change is hard in organizations. Change has to happen at the individual level, and you have to get everyone on the same page.
Right.
You have to get that team working together, get everyone focused on common objectives, and sometimes you need some short-term horsepower to break through and to get to that next level. With our focus, it's on providing that breakthrough,
okay.
To teach people a process. We don't focus on coming in and getting on company's payroll and becoming their chief execution officer,
right.
or having a seat
right.
at the executive table. We're in there to teach. We're in there to instill a process, because once you have a standard process, you can predict the results.
For sure.
And what we've done with the process of strategic execution, and the way Keene Institute defines it, is strategic execution is the process of clarifying, deploying, and actually achieving the results and the initiatives of an organization. And the key there is actually achieving.
Right.
And there's some statistics we can talk about that show that so many organizations fail to execute their strategies.
And it's great you mentioned the word, aligning everybody, and to do that measuring and having people teach us how to measure. It's just like if for those of us that are getting savvy about social media and websites, analytics, we do it all the time. That's how it seems so much more, makes so much sense, more sense to people, because it's a web page. Well, human beings are no different.
Yes.
You can measure. We do need to do that. I know most of us hate it.
Right.
But it's a necessary thing that I think can really benefit us. And I do want to talk about some numbers, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, we are back. We're talking with Tom Willingham of the Hampton Group. We are learning a lot in a very short period about what we all don't want to face, which is taking what we want to do and actually making it happen and execute. And I think this is a great slide. This is pivotal, Tom, because we're talking about the problem. What is the problem?
Problem is there's so many studies that have been done that show that 90% of organizations fail to fully execute their strategy. That's huge. You know, there's other studies that have been done that show that 64% of senior executives feel that their company doesn't have a process in place to be able to close that gap between where they want to be and where they're actually performing.
And it's so true. That 90% figure, I gotta believe it's accurate, because I just think about myself, and you know, we do a lot of things we try to execute, but it's amazing how many, the old adage, the best laid plans, we all think about them, we probably a lot of us write them down, we give ourselves reminders, but we don't. That next step is far more the implementation.
Oh, exactly. There's statistics that get thrown around, this time of year. People that have set New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
They say, 8% of New Year's resolutions actually get accomplished.
I thought that's a lot.
That's
usually a lot.
People head off to the gym, and then a couple months later they've fallen back into that habit.
Right.
And there are hurdles to execution, and a lot of that goes to corporate culture. Organizations just have not developed the processes to ensure that they will stay on track to the goals.
So give an example of, that malaise where that lack of process, an example of where it sets in.
Sure. I think one great example is, looking at Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers is a $1 billion industry. And every year you have people that say, hey, it's New Year coming up, I want to get that great beach body, I'm going to start going to Weight Watchers. And all Weight Watchers does is have you come in, they teach you a process, how to eat better, eat a little bit less, exercise, just do some smart things, and then every week you come in and you're held accountable. You come in, you weigh yourself, and you track your progress. So you're getting that in-game coaching of how am I doing, how am I proceeding towards the goal. The problem is that after a while, human nature kicks in and people think, hey, this is pretty easy. I can do this on my own.
Right.
So people back away from the process. They, start missing the meetings. They don't have the accountability coaching going on anymore. And what happens? The weight comes back on. And that's the same thing that happens in organizations. We may set the goals, but a couple months go by and we just fall off track because we're not keeping those critical goals in front. Management's not communicating with the individuals about the critical issues. We end up getting focused on the firefight of the day or the firefight of the week. And so if you can establish a process that aligns the purpose of the people in the organization with the purpose of the organization, and then keep everyone on track and on focus, you're going to achieve your results.
I love that. I think, because what I'm hearing and what you're saying is what I think it is where the breakdown occurs. We get, people become jaded in the process, they lose their interest. And really, I think a big part of implementation is excitement.
Yes.
And keeping that focus, both obviously on task, but excitement. It's so that it doesn't seem like, okay, I'll figure out a way to get out of the next meeting.
Right. Exactly.
And
exactly.
so, I hope we're all taking this in, because I know we all deal with this every day. We do this in our organization where we start the process and then it just peters out because we get sidetracked. So we're going to keep focusing on how not to get sidetracked. We're going to talk more about accountability. Come back with you back on the next slide. Welcome back, everybody. Mike Goldfarb with Tom Willingham at the Hampton Group. We're talking execution, alignment, accountability, great terms. We're putting some meat on them. I love this slide. Reminds me, unfortunately, of being a lawyer and my clients getting the jury verdict. So, but I love it. Accountability. Why why I ask you, can companies not manage to make people want to be accountable?
Well, change is so hard. We talked earlier about New Year's resolutions, and only 8% of New Year's resolutions actually getting accomplished.
I would know nothing about that. Nothing about that.
There's another even scarier statistic. In change or die situations, credible medical research shows that only 11% of people will actually make the change. And when we're talking about change or die situations, this isn't something where your wife sits you down and says, hey, you better clean out the garage this weekend or else I'm going to kill you, or I need you to get this done, or you're in trouble. This is a situation where your doctor actually sits you down, says you need to change this behavior or start doing this other behavior, and if you don't do that, you're going to die. In those situations, only 11% of people
Are you serious?
actually make the change. Yeah, that's incredible.
That is incredible.
And it's just because change is so hard for people. We have our comfort zone. We want that great beach body, but there's that conflict between our rational mind and our emotional mind.
So let me ask you, as someone who works in group dynamics and with the individual, what are some ideas, what are some tips you can maybe share with our viewers? How can you encourage people to want to be accountable, to want to welcome change?
Sure. The key thing that managers can do is start by breaking the change down into smaller increments. We like to think of the analogy of a rider and an elephant. The rider looks like they're in control. That's our rational mind, but the emotional mind is the elephant. And if that elephant, the emotional mind, gets off track, there's not a lot we can do about it. So if we can break that change down into smaller pieces, lay that foundation, set that clear path for success, it makes it easier for the individual to make those changes.
And that's so, I did my own presentation on EQ and emotional intelligence, and one of the things I did briefly touch on was setting those goals and making them manageable. I can relate this to my life. I'm sure most of us can. I remember I used to be a big smoker, and when eons ago, when I was 30, yeah,
You're 31 today.
Exactly. We didn't have electricity back then. When I was 30, and it's funny you mentioned doctor. My doctor said, Michael, you're 30 now. Quit smoking, and you have a chance to recover. But the best thing I did was every single day I took it. I hate to quote the old sports adage, one game at a time, but I broke it down that small. If I could make it through one day and then 2 days, it made all the difference. It worked, and that sounds kind of, Tom, what you're saying.
It is so key to break it down into those small steps, and before you even get there, establishing that clarity around what are we trying to accomplish. And we'll talk about that in our next slide of how companies don't do a good job of that.
This guy should have my job. Well segue. All right, man, we'll be back. Next slide. All right, everybody, we're back. I know, I can feel it. Your juices are getting going. I am. I'm excited, Tom. You're really starting to give us food for thought. I love this slide, the concept. We're talking about rolling it out now. So these look like some of the people in groups I've spoken to. But what happens? What are we dealing with here when it comes to the big plan rollout?
Right. When we talk about change and why it's so hard to implement, unfortunately, the traditional corporate culture doesn't help the process. Far too many organizations, they go off-site at the beginning of the year, they have the weekend retreat, they create the strategic plan, they come back with that 3-inch thick binder, and then they say, we need to now roll that out to the rest of the organization. And how do they roll it out? Print up signs, have a big town hall meeting rollout, trying to communicate that strategy and the plan to the rest of the team. Unfortunately, they don't do a great job of really clarifying the vision and clarifying the picture and communicating it in a way that really engages with the rest of the employees. So as you see on the slide, you get the employees thinking, man, WIIFM, what's in it for me? Man, I've got to get back to my job. What are these big, huge goals that they're talking about? How does it really impact me? And so because the organization hasn't made that connection, the employees are at a loss.
Right.
They don't know how to start.
It does. I mean, it becomes like it's like a serpent with 8 heads, and it feels like you're lost. And I know a lot of our people are HR, and we know better than most because when we hand people that free reminder handbook, people's eyes pop out. They go, "You got to be kidding me!" It almost creates an immediate negative feeling. It's overwhelming.
Exactly.
So how do you just give us some ideas of how do you go about it in a different way that doesn't make it feel so absolutely unsustainable, overwhelming, and just unreal?
Right. The key is, as we were talking earlier about change, it's breaking it down into those smaller steps and getting more people involved in the process. We talk about a end-focused strategy where you actually have the senior management team talking about the strategy, communicating that down, but then also engaging people at the lower level and saying, if we're trying to accomplish these specific initiatives, how can you impact the company? You're in the front line, you give us some ideas so that by working together at both ends, you end up with a better strategy, you end up engaging the people more. Because otherwise, you have the senior management team just trying to communicate more, and it's like when you meet someone from a different country. You're trying to have a conversation, they don't understand, they look perplexed, and what do? You talk louder. You don't understand me? You talk louder.
You talk louder and you slow down. It doesn't work.
Exactly. And so what does management do when the company starts to not execute? They start talking louder. They start communicating louder.
That's right.
And again, they're just confusing.
Eventually they use cue cards.
Exactly.
I love what you're talking, because you're talking about inclusiveness and feedback. And it is so true. Look at and I don't care which side of the political aisle you're on, but look at the laissez-faire, the apathy with the voter, and that's because there is no involvement. There's no request from our leaders as a society, as a culture, to have that involvement. And I think that same thing, unfortunately, is all too prevalent in the private sector. And it sounds like what you're kind of touching on as well here, Tom, is culture. What kind of a culture are you sort of preaching that we should be thinking about?
Right. With this, we're creating a culture of accountability and performance. And part of the process that we go through in establishing strategic execution as a corporate culture, as a core competency of an organization, is reframing the goals and expectations for individuals so that they really understand what is going to be expected of them, and they have that clarity.
And go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
But there's a couple of challenges, and we'll see in this next slide one of the biggest challenges that we see that management has to deal with.
Perfect. And I will save my closing question for that one. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're here with Tom Willingham of the Hampton Group, and this stuff I'm blown away. I know that obviously we're talking big picture stuff, but these are the concepts we all have to think about. I like this one. I love images. I see a couple buckets. Give us the 411 on what we're looking at here.
Sure. We were just talking about why the traditional corporate culture and rollout methodology of a strategic plan doesn't work. We talked about how senior management tries to communicate louder and louder to an organization. But one of the key challenges that we've discovered is that employees have two types of activities that they're dealing with. You've got the CEO who's trying to drive the improvement of the organization. He's looking at how can we improve the performance of the organization on a quarter-to-quarter basis. How can we improve that organization, move it forward? But yet the employees are faced day-to-day with what we call the whirlwind of activities just to keep the lights on. And unfortunately, when you look at that whirlwind of day-to-day activities just overwhelms the strategic initiatives. And so employees just get sucked into that and don't have the opportunity to focus on how they can move the organization forward.
And totally valid point. And all of us have had lower level jobs, let's call it what they are, and have felt that real sad sack feeling of the alarm goes off, why I'm just going through the motions, and that's what I feel is expected of me, and I don't want to be, reprimanded for not having, filed that.
Right.
If anyone has seen The Office, I think it was a TPM report or something, But who's in the line of fire, so to speak, from management? Where does that buck stop? I know you talk upper management, obviously. Who's got that responsibility to get people out of that rut?
It's really it starts with that leadership team of the organization. And by clearly communicating the strategy and having a process in place that addresses both the strategic issues, what we call in our process the goals and initiatives, and also addresses the day-to-day activities. And we call the day-to-day activities the primary job responsibilities of an employee.
Right.
And as we work with companies and we work with employees, a good example that I like to use is take a traditional customer service representative.
Sure.
If you ask them, what is your job? What are you supposed to be doing? Oftentimes they'll say, well, I'm supposed to answer the phone on 2 rings and help enter sales orders as required. And what we do is we work them through a process where we say, how does what you do every day connect to the bigger picture of the organization? And one example we actually came up with the responsibility of, for that employee, it's my responsibility is to provide an outstanding customer experience. And so when you reframe things that way, it helps the employee to understand that bigger picture of, I'm not just here to do an activity or a task that I can check off the list and say, okay, I answered the phone, I entered these orders. What is the impact for you? How are you really helping the organization move forward? Another one, you look at a dishwasher at a restaurant.
Perfect example.
Why are you there?
Right.
You're not there just to make sure that the dishes are clean.
That's right.
You're there to make sure that people want to come back, that they have an outstanding dining experience. And when we're able to reframe the responsibilities and to communicate to employees that yes, there are some bigger picture initiatives that we're trying to address, and you have some day-to-day responsibilities, but they are interconnected.
I love it. I think this is so perfect because it's so fundamental. If you guys take away one thing from this webinar, it's what I think Tom's illustrated so well is that disconnect between the big picture vision of the high mucky mucks and the absolute blindness, not necessarily their own fault, of the mainline worker having absolutely no connection. There's a total disconnect in there. And I love the idea that you brought up the dishwasher, because I fervently believe, it is the American way. Everyone should understand, really believe that in the organization they're part of, they have an opportunity to grow and develop. And I think it's the growth and development that leads to the big picture. It sounds like you're saying that's what we need to, that upper management needs to make that connection.
Exactly, and you need to cascade those goals and initiatives down to make sure that people understand it and that they're energized, so that when people wake up in the morning, as you said, the alarm clock goes off. We want people excited when they come in. We don't want folks that are coming in and just punching the clock date.
That's right. And for the skeptics out there, Tom, this is doable stuff. This can be done.
It can be done, and what we're going to talk about on the next slide is what it actually takes to make this happen.
You heard the man. We'll be right back. Well, we're back. We are just learning tons. I am. And we're talking to Tom Willingham of the Hampton Group, and we're going to keep that focus right now, Tom, about moving forward with implementing a strong execution of strategy. Tell us what we need to know here.
Sure. In order to implement that strategy, leadership has to understand a couple of very key elements. The first is that execution happens down at the individual level. And so as we were talking just a minute ago about employees understanding the big picture, understanding where the organization is going. Here, are we heading to San Francisco, or are we heading south to San Diego? It's critical for employees to understand that. And then the second step, to be able to understand how their goals link to that. And if employees understand that and they're able to execute, the organization is going to be able to move forward. But again, as we talked about, change is hard for people. And the traditional process that many organizations use is that once a year performance review. So here's the goals that are established at the beginning of the year. 11, 12 months go by, if the company even has a performance management process.
Or at least if they stick with it.
Exactly, or if they stick with it. And then the employee comes in with this stack of paper and says, hey boss, look at all the things I did this year. Isn't this great? And the manager's looking at him saying, that's not what I wanted you to work on this year. There just wasn't a connection. So what we do is we focus on creating what we call a performance agreement. And what that performance agreement does is it clarifies for that individual what their responsibilities are, it clarifies what their goals are going to be, and the tasks that they need to work on. So instead of it being management pushing down to the employee on some very big, audacious goals, they're sharing what the initiatives are and then asking the employee to actually think, wow, what a great thing.
What a concept.
Think, and write their own goals.
Right.
And that's hard.
It is.
And we said earlier that this is not a process that you can just flip a switch and implement overnight. It's something that takes time. And the first time that an employee has to go out and write their own goals, they may struggle with it. That's okay. The key element is that the employee is starting to learn. They're starting to write the goal in their own terms as they understand it, so that up front we can determine if there's any miscommunication between the employee and manager. And once you can break through that barrier, it's going to make that change much easier for people because they're going to have the clarity, they understand the vision of what they need to accomplish in their own terms.
So it's interesting. It's not only telling them what the big picture is, there's a huge focus here before you even move forward of getting their input, their feedback, so that they get buy-in, so that they feel a part of it.
Exactly, because if they feel a part of it, if they can see and visualize that target, it's going to energize and get them motivated.
Right, and I just want to just touch on this a little more in terms of how management responds, because I think it's so important. I think it's great that we ask people to think, that we ask them to provide feedback. I think the one thing we want to be cognizant of as well, correct, is encouraging them, is not making them feel like everything they came up with, which took them a long time to do,
right,
is stupid.
Yes, that is so key. You have to have a process that enables employee and manager to meet on a more neutral basis. So as we create these performance agreements and we have a series of progress meetings throughout the year where the employee and manager aren't going more than 30 or 60 days without talking about the employee's performance, you're not talking each time about salary,
Right.
about raises and increases. You're talking about the employee's plan.
Right.
Here's the plan that the employee wrote that they signed up to, so that when we're sitting down at the end of February and you're saying, Tom, how are you doing? Did you go out and accomplish the first couple of tasks? If I didn't accomplish that, it's not a negative conversation. There's still 10 more months for me to improve my performance,
Sure.
but you can ask those questions to say, why didn't we complete those?
Right.
Did I overload you with other projects? Right. Did the priorities perhaps shift? That gives the opportunity for the employee to say, hey boss, you just buried me with this other project, or there's this new acquisition or initiative that we're looking at. I had to focus my time over here.
That's great, because what you just said is we touched on making the person accountable without being punitive. We're still carrying through. It sounds like a huge part of what the system brings in is respect. There's a mutuality of respect and allowing someone to say, if you do the monitoring on a frequent enough basis, hey, it didn't happen, but that's okay. Let's talk about why, as opposed to what didn't you do and why didn't you stay on task. and I also love the fact that you said, look, this is not all about salary and raises. If anyone in HR, most of you know this, the statistics are undeniable that in study after study, employees put salary at the lowest level of what they want to truly get out of a position. They want opportunity, they want to grow, they want respect, they want to be heard. This is everything you're talking about.
Yes, employees want feedback. They want to be excited when they come in. They want to know that they're focused on the right things, that they're achieving results. And you need a system in place to make sure that this happens, and so that it doesn't turn into that old school punitive, here's a bigger sledgehammer that I can use to beat up my employees with. And what I use is a process called KeenLink. And KeenLink is what's called a strategic execution management system. Now, strategic execution management systems are new. There's not a lot of them out there. There's a lot of systems that are just automated review writers. But what the KeenLink process does is helps create this process that establishes and clarifies that foundation data so that everyone in the organization understands it. It creates that plan. It helps the employees by defining a performance agreement where they understand their primary job responsibilities. They understand the goals and the tasks that they're going to be held accountable to. We spend a lot of time with the employee and manager defining the expectations, very simply. What does it mean to miss, meet, or exceed my goals? So by clarifying that, when we have these, what we call progress meetings throughout the year, it makes it much easier for the manager to provide that feedback. Because one of the things that employees and managers hate is having to have that traditional performance review. Managers hate giving negative feedback. They will do everything that they can to avoid having to do that. But what this process does, and the strategic execution management system does, is it takes that edge off. Because you're not waiting until the employee has dug a huge hole in the ground and they're one step away from, from
being fired and
being fired.
Exactly.
You're addressing that and being very proactive. So it's a more positive experience. Now I'm not saying that it's all, apple pie and motherhood and it's wonderful. The execution management system does have the opportunity for the manager to capture negative impact areas, or if there's some concerns, we can capture that. And we've been able to use that in situations where an employee has come back and they've tried to pursue legal recourse to regain a job. We've been able to use some of the documentation that the Keenlink system generates to shut down.
There's a great little offshoot. There's a perfect little extra bonus. I mean, it does. We all harp on paperwork, document,
Exactly.
and there's a lot of that here. But I love everything we're hearing is so valuable, because I think what we're talking about, and another overused word lately is empowerment, but we're empowering the individual within the framework of a strategy. We're showing them that they have a place, they mean something, and it's not just because they're working here they mean something, it's because the company is accepting and listening to them as well. And I think, what more can you ask for if you're a person who knows that not only does your opinion count, but it's being measured and listened to in a very small cyclical framework where they're not waiting 6 months or a year, and then by then you feel like, you know what, everything you told me 6 months ago is meaningless.
Right, there's so many challenges with the traditional performance agreement. You have the halo effect or the recency effect. Do something great that 30 days before the end of the year, and the boss remembers that. That can be good, but what about the learning opportunity of something that happened that first quarter of the year? If there was something where the employee stumbled, did we forget about that? By having these progress meetings throughout the year and having a system and a process that is tracking that performance, we're able to capture that information and make sure that it's at the forefront. Again, when you get to the end of the year, it's not something that we're saying, oh, you're out of here because you stubbed your toe back in February. No, it's an opportunity to celebrate and say, look, we started off the year on the wrong foot, but look at how much you have improved. Isn't that a wonderful thing for the employee to experience? Also, if the employee starts off strong and then the organization has a challenge, where I was, the company where I first used this back in 2000, we were an aerospace component manufacturer. 9/11 hits. We had to basically take our strategic plan and throw it out the window and restart. But this process, the Keenlink process, enabled us to take that plan, refocus everyone, and get the organization moving forward again.
You were a convert.
That's a convert. That's
great. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Michael Goldfarb talking to Tom Willingham of the Hampton Group. Tom, this was fantastic. I know it's given me so much food for thought. If you had to summarize the major takeaways, what would they be?
There's a great quote from Thomas Edison that we like to use. It's that vision without execution is hallucination. And that's the key is that you can have a vision, but if you're not executing, and as Jim Collins, as his research team in the book Good to Great found, it's execution that separates the good from the great. Not strategy, but execution. And so many companies do a great job of going out and going through that traditional process of going off-site, creating the strategic plan, determining where they want to go, but then they create that 3-inch thick binder that just sits on the shelf, and they don't actually implement, or they stumble and they're not successfully actually implementing and executing that strategy. And the process that I hope you've learned today, and some of the tips that you've learned, are how you can actually bridge that gap between strategy and execution to actually successfully implement your strategic plan.
I love it. I love it. And I think that, you've shown that everybody has value to add. And, because as Clint Eastwood said, know your limitations. We all have limitations. And I think to involve everybody in the big picture is great. Tom, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about this process?
Sure. If someone wants to learn more information about it, again, my name's Tom Willingham. I'm president of the Hampton Group. On the slide, you see my contact information. My phone number is area code 562-673-9950. You can email me at tomw@thampton.com. That's the Hampton Group. And our website is www.thampton.com. And Michael, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to share this information. Execution management and successfully executing strategies is one of the big unaddressed issues in the business world today. And there's just a huge gap between where companies are setting their sights and where they're actually performing. And our goal is just to get out there and share the message and share the concept of strategic execution and execution management with organizations.
Well, that was great, Tom. It was totally my pleasure. So lovely saw you at the table. And again, thank you, Tom. I hope you all enjoyed it. Stay tuned for another Holman HR webinar. We'll be back with another great guest. Take care, everybody.